Hello, it's Jay here again and welcome to another tutorial. So in this lesson we're going to work on filling out this function here. But before we do, we need to create some new variables up at the very top. So it's actually this one where we find the closest enemy. So I'm going to come right at the very top. I'm going to create a line break between player and the enemy. And we're going to come below the first one of type private. And we're going to have of type game object with a capital G. We'll open and close the square type of brackets. And we'll give it a name of enemies. Let's close that line off. So we'll say creates an array of enemy game objects. We'll come here, we'll make this one public for now. And we're going to say game object again with a capital G underscore. And we want the closest enemy as a naming convention. Let's close that line off into the comments. Defines the closest enemy game object. We'll come below here. This can be of type private. It can be of type float, and we're going to say underscore enemy distance. Again, we'll close the line off and into the comments. So we'll just say defines the closest enemy distance. And we'll keep going with another private float underscore, and we're going to say the current enemy distance. Let's close that line off into the comments. We'll put defines current and current distance of the closest enemy. And finally of type private, and we're going to be of type vector3 underscore, and we'll put distance. In fact, I'll just put dist, and then we want player and enemy, and we'll say that is equal to a vector3 dot 0. Let's close that line off there. So we'll say defines vector3 between player and, we'll say closest enemy. In fact, I'll create a line break there, and let's save that off there. So we have our player transform, enemy transform. This creates an array of all the enemy game objects. I'll just fix that typo there in the comments. This is going to be the closest enemy to the player within this array. Obviously, this is the closest distance, closest enemy distance, the current enemy distance, and then the vector3 between the player and the closest enemy. And we just zero that out to begin with. So with that said, let's come to this block here. And we'll uncomment it, and we'll begin to fill it out. So we'll say underscore enemies, So where are we? This is the array here, named enemies. So let's come back. Where are we? Here. And we're going to say that it's going to be equal to game object, capital G, dot, and we want find game objects with tag. And it must be the plural in this case. I know we normally use the singular, but in this case it's the plural of objects. So please make sure that's correct, otherwise this will not work. So please be aware of that. We'll open and close brackets. We'll close the line off inside the brackets. Little speech marks, and we'll say enemy. And let's get that into the comments. So we'll say enemies underscore enemies equals find all game objects with the tag of enemy. And you can put the little speech marks in the comment as well. So exactly what it says we're doing in the comments, we're just finding all the enemy in the game, all the enemies, they'll all be tagged, and then we're assigning them to this game object array. Let's continue on. Closest enemy is going to be equal to null. So we're just setting it to null to begin with before we do anything else. So let's just get the comments in place. And we'll say closest enemy is equal to null. And we want to null it out before we do anything else, simply because the position's going to be changing all the time of all the enemies. So let's make that equal to null. And then we're going to say underscore enemy distance is going to be equal to mathf dot infinity. Let's close that line off into the comments. So enemy distance is equal to math infinity. Excuse me. So what this means is that there's no defined boundary in when this begins to find the enemy game objects. It doesn't go to a certain radius, it will find all the enemies within that scene. And then we're going to come below and we're going to say for each. Open and close brackets will open and close again. Let's come inside this first set of brackets and we're going to say game object again with the capital G. And we need to give this a naming convention. So let's say underscore en. And yeah, we'll leave it as en for enemy. And we're going to say in underscore enemies. And that's the reason why I'm using underscore en, because I'm running out of naming conventions. So let's get that into the comments. So we'll say for each game object in the enemy array. And we'll enter here, we'll come inside this second set of brackets. And we're going to say underscore the distance, player and enemy. And we're going to say that's going to be equal to underscore en dot transform dot position minus, our transform dot position. Let's close that line off. We'll break it up for commenting. So en, obviously we're getting the enemy's transform and position minus our transform and position, and we are going to actually assign values to this naming convention very shortly, and hopefully you'll see better then how it will all work. So we'll say in the comments distance between player and enemy, and in fact we'll put in this line is equal to, and then we'll come to the next line. We'll say we'll just say enemy position minus player position. Let's come below here, underscore current enemy distance. We're going to make that equal to the underscore distance between the player and enemy dot, and we want to use the square magnitude, so SQR magnitude. Let's close the line off, and we'll get this into the comments. So we'll say current enemy distance is equal to distance between player and the enemy. And we'll come here below, we'll say if open and close brackets will open and close again. We'll come inside that first set of brackets, underscore current enemy distance less than enemy distance. Let's get that into the comments. So we'll say if current enemy distance is less than enemy distance, we'll come inside there. So where we're at now, let's come back and have a look at this. So the enemy distance is equal to infinity within the scene. So the current enemy distance is the distance between the player and the enemy, which is defined here. Distance player and enemy is equal to the enemy transform minus our transform. But however, if the current enemy distance is less than the enemy distance, which means that the enemy game objects or the player or both have moved around the scene, and now the enemy distance, as we can see, current enemy distance is less than this distance, we need to return the next closest enemy. Basically what it means is that the enemy game object that was the closest to us is no longer the closest enemy. Another enemy has taken that position. So we need to get that position, and we'll say underscore that the closest enemy is equal to underscore en. Let's close that line off, and this goes back to what I was saying in this line. We now say that the closest enemy is equal to this naming convention. So this line now makes a lot more sense. The distance between the player and the enemy is the closest enemy transform position minus the player's. Let's get that into the comments. So we'll say that the closest enemy equals, and we'll just say underscore EN. Let's use the naming convention. It might make things a little bit easier. So in the next line, underscore enemy transform is equal to underscore EN dot transform. Let's close that line off. Into the comments, so we'll say enemy equals, and we'll say, in fact, we'll say enemy transform equals the underscore EN transform, and we'll come below here. So we're saying that this is defined within this naming convention now, the closest enemy, but it's not just assigned with no value. The value is the transform, and then we assign it to this naming convention, so we actually know the enemy position or its transform. So let's come below here, underscore enemy distance equals the underscore current enemy distance. Let's close that line off. Into the comments, enemy distance equals current enemy distance. And now we have those two lines in place, we can see how this if statement works. We assign it to these values, current enemy distance and enemy distance. So we now say that this variable is no longer greater than this one. We make it equal to, and we can actually get rid of that empty line. We'll come below this close brackets. Where are we? We need to come here. So just before the very last closed brackets, we'll say return the closest enemy. We'll close the line off. Into the comments, return the closest enemy game object. And let's save that off there, because we are going to leave it here for this lesson. We'll actually get everything set up within the scene and do the testing in the next lesson. But this has been a little bit more complicated than what we normally do, and I hope I've explained it in a way that you understand. And if not, please, as always, send me a private message or leave a comment below. But I think we've covered this quite well at the moment, so I'm just leaving it up on screen here so you can pause the video if you need to. It's a good idea to not only put in the comments that I have, but also read through them and see for yourself how it all ties in and works together to make sure that we are always, when calling this function, returning the closest enemy game object, and then that will tell us if we can safely fast travel. Because if the closest enemy is too close, and within our fast travel safe radius, then we're going to say, sorry, but the player cannot fast travel. So, as I said, we'll leave it here for now. As always, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope to see you next time. And until then, as always, bye for now.